So this is a T34 from Revell in 1/40th scale. I built this kit probably in 1972 or 73. Why did I pick out a 40th scale kit? Well, it was probably, during my trip to the dime store, the only tank kit on the shelf. Regardless of why I built it, it was a really fun kit to build. It's not horribly accurate, but it went together fairly well, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. You'll see this green paint, which is pretty close to what Soviet paint looked like. It would have been Pactra, and I brush painted it. I can see the brush marks down here. But on this side, I don't see any brush marks, and that's a testament to the quality of that Pactra paint, not to my ability with a paintbrush when I was 13. What I want to do with this tank, as it is, this model is one of the few survivors of my youth when I first started building models. Actually, I had been building models for about 4 or 5 years by the time I got to this. I still didn't know what an airbrush was. I didn't have very many friends that built models. I wasn't a member of a modeling club or read any modeling magazines at that point. So I was just kind of on my own. But what I want to do with this, so that I have some sort of representation of what my modeling was like when I was a kid, is I want to not redo the model, but simply restore it. So I'm not going to repaint it. I'm not going to knock off the dust, which looks really cool. I'm not going to touch up the decals. What I want to do, though, is to build the missing pieces. So you can see back here, I'm missing some grab handles, and there's some on this other side that's missing as well. I'm missing the commander's hatch. If you look on the front, I'm missing the bow gun, and I'm missing the driver's hatch. And maybe the toughest part, well, on the back too, I'm missing whatever this bracket is. You see this bracket right here? I'm missing the one that goes there. And perhaps one of the more challenging pieces are going to be the road wheels, because I'm missing 1.5 road wheels. So for this video, I'm going to go through what I will do, the techniques I'll use, the materials and tools that I'll use to replicate these parts and bring this old T34 back to its complete self. So stick around and we'll start doing some modeling. So along with being a plastic modeler for a long time, I was also in the hobby business for close to 30 years. And in that capacity, I had the opportunity to build models for other people. Once in a while, I'd get a model in to work on that was missing parts that I'd have to recreate. And this helicopter was one of them. This was a desktop. It's made of wood. And when it came to me, the entire rotor was missing, as well as the tail rotor. None of that was available for me to work on. So I had to make it from scratch. Luckily, we had a model kit that was about the same scale, so I could look at the parts out of that kit and try and replicate them. So what I did is I made these blades out of evergreen white plastic, white styrene, with some brass rods in here for strength. The same thing back here on the tail rotor with a few fiddly bits. Too bad the picture's not that good. It's an old picture of it. And then with my little vacuum form, I made a mold, basically it was out of wood, and I sanded it real smooth, and I just made a pull out of it with my vacuum form to make this little cap. And when the guy came to pick it up, he couldn't believe what it looked like. Basically, we restored it. Now, looking at it from a modeler's viewpoint, it might have been a little rough, but it brought the model back to life. And that's what we're going to try and do with this old T34. So I have several grab handles that I need to replace. This is the kit piece. So I was experimenting around a little bit with this rod. It's about 40 thousandths rod, which is just about exactly what this is according to my micrometers. I took a piece and I just bent it with a pair of my small modeling pliers. The only thing I didn't like is this radius seems to be a little too much for me, and it was starting to break right there. I didn't heat it up. That's always an option. You can heat this up a little bit and it becomes more pliable. So I cut these lengths from this rod, and so what I did here is I cut some shorter pieces, and I use this file, which is a round file, and I sanded, or I filed a little groove in this so that it would mate up to the handle part of this grab handle, and that enabled me to, after the glue had set, to sand this radius in there. And I put a little bit of Mr. Surfacer, so it's a kind of a thick primer paint on the inside, and sanded it. So I still have the radius, and still, instead of it being a sharp 90 degree, it gave me a little bit of a radius. So for the bow machine gun, what I think I'm going to do is take a piece of this solid quarter square. See if I can get it in the picture. So I've hit an angle on there to try and replicate what this angle is here, and I came pretty close. So I'm going to build this piece up. I have a couple other pieces that I'm going to glue to it to make it a little thicker. So I have these three pieces that pretty much make up the width, if I can point to it, the width of that bow machine gun. So I'm going to glue these together, and then I will shape the top of it so it's kind of round. The kit came with a piece that was pretty slab-sided, which isn't very accurate, but it's what this kit had. So that's what we're going to go with. Now for the driver's hatch, marked up with a pencil on this sheet styrene. So I'm going to cut that out, and that will become my hatch. So I'll do a little bit of work on this and get back with you and see how it looks. On the back end, I'm missing one of these racks, which would be right there. No rack. So I'm working on fabricating that, and I've tried a couple things so far that I'll run by you. So this piece I carved out of a solid piece of sheet. Same sheet I'm getting my road wheels off of. And I've also tried my hand at gluing some pieces together and get it oriented right. It's at about the same angle. So I think this one here looks a little more uniform. I just used some 40 square strip that I've cut at an angle right there, and I'm going to use this to make those three brackets that I showed you earlier. We'll see how it turns out. So the method I used for cutting out the discs that I turned into road wheels was I have this Draftsman circle template, and I wanted to have a diameter the size of this wheel minus the rim. So I looked around on my template to find out which one of those would be the right one. So this last guy here is pretty close. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'll use this template with a sheet of styrene. I'll just place it over the top, and I will use a scribing tool. You could use different things for this, the back of an X-Acto blade, or maybe even a needle chucked up in a pin vise. But I happen to have this scribing tool, and I'll run it around the outside of this. So I'll put a little tape on my circle template to keep it steady. And I'll take this scriber that I have, and I'll run it around the outside of this a few times so that I get a pretty decent groove. So I could either continue to run the scriber around in that groove until it goes all the way through, which is, if I can show you here, which is what I did on a couple of these road wheels. Or you can take your nippers and kind of nip all the way around there, then take a sanding stick and sand up to the line that you scribed. There's other ways to do this if you don't happen to have a circle template. I have this old compass, so I've taken the lid out of one side and put another needle in there, and you just takes a little more fiddling, but you want to guesstimate exactly where you want to be. You got the center of the hub and then the outside of where the rim of the road wheel will go, and I'll just start doing the same thing and running it around until I have established a groove in the plastic. Then I can go back with my nippers and nip it out and sand it with my sander, and it gets me the same place. I just, this time around, chose to use the circle template. So after I have the road wheel cut to shape and have the rim glued on, filled and sanded, I have temporarily glued it to our one existing road wheel. So what I'm going to do now is drill out the holes. I've found a couple drill bits that fit fairly snugly into the holes that came in the kit. You can see the white plastic through them there. So there's larger holes on the outside diameter of the wheel and smaller holes on the inside. So I will place these down on my mat, and I'll try and get this about as square as I can, holding the drill bit plumb, so that by the time I'm done drilling the holes, they're symmetric around the hub. So this will be a kind of a sorry camera shot, but I'll show you what it looks like once I get through. It's just a twist drill and this little pin vise, and it took that long to go through. You see the drill bit coming through there. So I will go all the way around, and then I'll switch out and go to the larger drill bit. So here's how the first set of holes turned out. You can see they look fairly symmetrical. I'm going to go through each one of these holes with this drill bit, just running in and out to try and clean out some of the debris left from drilling through the plastic. Now I'm going to take the larger bit right here and go through and work on these larger holes, and we'll see how we do. It's a neat little pin vise. It has basically 4 chucks for several different sizes of drill bits, and it handles everything that I've got for these micro bits. Once again, I'm going to leave it on my work surface so that I can try and get my drill as plumb as I can for drilling these holes. So I've got a set of these nifty little razor saws. I don't know that you can even see the teeth on this thing right here, but it came as a photo etch set, and it's pretty thin metal, flexible. I'm going to run it along the white styrene and see if I can't separate it from the kit piece. I'll just run it back and forth several times, and I'll be able to see it go through that center hub. I can see part of it already. I don't know if you can see it on the camera. Almost done. Try and go that to the other side real quick. There we go. So I left a little bit of my kit part behind, so I might have to build that back up before I put these together to make that road wheel set. But let's see how our holes look. Like I said, I'm going to take my drill bit and use it kind of as a burr and run it through these holes again just to clean them up. You can see some of them still have some debris from the act of drilling. So we'll clean that up a little bit. Well, here's one that I had made earlier that I've cleaned up a little bit. After I was done with the drill bits, I took my X-Acto knife and I'll put it in that hole and just real lightly with almost no pressure, just turn it around in there to clean up some of the rest of the shavings from having drilled through the plastic. And I'll go through and do this all the way around. As you can see, it cleans out that debris pretty good, and you just kind of blow it off of there. And you can also see that I've widened this hole to fit onto the axle of the kit, so it looks more like the kit part. But there's something missing now. As you can plainly see, there are ribs on the kit part that are sadly not on the part that I just made. So how do we get around that? I'll show you. Here is the first wheel that I started working on. As you can see, it has the ribs that I've added. And to me it looks pretty darn good, at least for the purposes of trying to bring this little tank back to some sort of its original form. I think that's going to be pretty respectable right there. So how did I do that? Well, I'll show you. So the method I used for cutting out the ribs for my road wheels was I made a little jig with this contraption called the chopper. It's from Northwest Shortline. Had this thing for a long time, and it works pretty well. As you can see, got a razor blade that's screwed to this handle that's hinged right here, and I've got a stop on this 30, 60, 90 triangle with these little bolts that go through this aluminum strip that hold down the triangle in place, and that's what I use as the stop. So let's see if I can film this as I put one through. So I just put the strip styrene in here against the stop and bring down. You can see it's against the stop there, and it'll just bring down the chopper, and it cuts right through it. So there's a number of ways I could have done this. I did make a little jig, so you just place the piece of strip styrene right up against that stop and cut it with your nippers or your X-Acto knife. And that's one way. You could simply just use a straight edge and line it up with the correct dimension and cut it that way. I happen to have a chopper. It's pretty easy, so that's what I used. I'm going to show you guys how I glue these ribs to the wheels. I'm going to fiddle with that rim a little bit so I can, or rib, so I can get it centered between the holes. And there it is, more or less. We're just eyeballing it. See if I can get another one in there. So I'll just keep, I don't know if you can see that, get a shadow going, but I'm going to just keep on going around there until they're done. And then I'll show you the next step. So another piece that we need to construct, actually a couple of them in this case. If you'll notice on this side, like we said before, we're missing 2 road wheels. Actually 4, 2 inside, 2 outside. But we're also missing the hubs. So I'll just show you on this side what we're up against with the hub. I'll find my pointer here. So you got a round disc, you got 5 bolts, and then there's this little, I don't know what you call it, it's a cap over the bearings, but it has a little cone and then a centerpiece that's rounded over. So it's kind of a little complex part if we're going to build it by ourselves. So I'll show you what I ended up with my first try around, and this was kind of a pain in the fanny, but I'll set it right there and show you. So what I did, and I realized some of these aren't quite to the same scale, so these bolts look a little big, and this may sound a little bit proud, but I'm hoping that once it's all together and painted that nobody's going to notice, or they won't pick one out in the crowd and say, oh, that's obviously wrong. But I took a piece of 40th, actually 80 thousandths rod. I drilled a hole down the center of it, in which I put this 40 thousandths. I'd made a cone more or less out of the 80 thousandths and sharpened the 40 thousandths a little bit to try and replicate what I'm doing. Let me see if I can find a pair of pliers or tweezers, and I'll show you kind of a profile view if I don't squish it. Anyway, nice little 3D effect, and it'll sit right over the top of that. So I need to build another one, if I can make it sit on there right. And I'm fiddling around also with trying to make some axles. I found some sprue that's pretty close. And then I made this out of some half-round stock to go right in that hole right there. The grab handles are all put together. If you look at this guy here, I've already put the little fillets in there and sanded the corners around to replicate the kit piece. So that's what I still need to do here, is add a little bit of putty in this corner and then round over the outside edges, and those will be ready to put on. This guy right here is the driver's hatch. I just cut this out of some sheet and used my little saw to open up this visor port. And if I pick this up, let's see if I can do it while I'm on the camera. You see that it'll focus. Let's get rid of the knife, that might help. So I put these little angles on there, on top of which, or in between there, I'll put this guy right here, which is the top of that visor. And these are parts to the hinges that will be glued onto here, and they'll fit right here. You can kind of see where the paint didn't get applied 50 years ago. Anyway, that's where that will go. Now, these guys here are for this bracket that's missing on the back of the tank. So there's the one that's there, and these little pieces will be right there. The bow machine gun mount, I had laminated together some pieces of styrene. You can see how I was trying to make some sort of a profile out of it by sanding it down. Well, what I've ended up with are these guys here. So that is going, let's see if I have a pair of tweezers. So this guy will end up right here. And here is the armored plate through which the machine gun fires. And this is the shroud, beginning of the shroud for the machine gun itself. And this will mount right here. Of course, it has to be trimmed down quite a bit. Lastly, so far, is the commander's hatch. So these guys here are going to be parts of the hinge. If you look up on top of the tank, there's pins that would go through each one of these two pieces. And those pins are represented by these little pieces of rod that I've cut off, and these are part of the hinge itself. And now there's a couple little pieces that I poked out with a punch. These guys here, I haven't glued them yet. But my only reference really is on ScaleMates, and I'll show you a screenshot of it, is a PDF of somebody had made copies of the original instructions. And that's what I have to go off of. So we'll see how it turns out. Back over here to the commander's, or back to the driver's hatch. I've kind of laid out where some bolts will be. Bolts or rivets. Neither one is very accurate, but according to the kit, it had these, I'll call them rivets. And what I've done is I used a punch, and I've punched out the little holes, or the little rivets that I'm going to use. This is of course, the punch I used, and so that's what's going to go onto the gunner's hatch. So I took all my little fiddly bits, my road wheels and hatches and machine gun and everything, and I gave it a coat of my favorite primer, which is, to me, a surface primer. This is kind of the thrilling part of this scratch build when you're scratch building things, parts, or actually whole kits, is when you get primer on it and you can really start to see the detail that you've put into your parts, and hopefully see how it all comes together. And it's just kind of, like I said, it's kind of thrilling. And I think they turned out pretty good compared to what I had to work with and the research material that I had. So the next step is trying to match the paint. And that's going to be tough. So I've tried this. I took some flat yellow from Tamiya, and I've mixed it a little bit with some olive drab from Tamiya. And I did a little test strip, and I had to keep fiddling around. You can probably see it and keep it from moving. Started out too dark and then added a little bit more yellow. And then the final, I don't know, depending on the color of the light that I'm under, this seems to be a pretty close match. So I'm going to go ahead and get my airbrush ready and put some paint on this thing and see how it looks. Just an update on some of the parts. I didn't like how big these little bolt heads were when I originally put them on, so I carved them off and put on some smaller ones, and I made a little antenna. It's kind of chunky looking, but it looks kind of like what the instructions show that it would have had. So anyway, let me get my airbrush ready, like I said, and we'll put some paint on these things. I went ahead and painted the parts and applied them to the model. I also took some oil paint to add some weathering to those new parts to try to make them blend in somewhat. So you get a kind of an idea of how it looks before and after. I'm pretty pleased with it. The paint matched fairly well. Good enough for me. Now I can put this up on the shelf and continue to enjoy it in its completed form. So thanks a bunch for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.